Good morning. I just wanted to share a bit on cybersecurity in the cyber landscape and so certain things to keep into consideration. So this day and age, as you know, most people are unaware of where their networks begin and where they end, right? So a lot of organizations, are plagued with the worry of, number one, network visibility. Perhaps they don't know where their assets are sitting. More importantly, how to keep up with the vectors of entry, right? So for example, in the past it used to be quite simple, because if you had an endpoint or you had a network where you know the parameters are, right, you just write more aggressive firewall rules, or on your endpoint you have rules and signature-based technologies that are looking for specific attack patterns. But in this day and age, things have changed. A lot of the attacks that we're seeing, are actually acting on as if they're human, or trying to undermine all of our security efforts that are primarily rule and signature based. So this can come from a number of different vectors, right? So let's say an insider, right? So let's say someone who wants to cause harm into an organization, right? They've been in an organization long enough to understand where the key assets are, what information they can take from the organization and how they can monetize it, okay? They will work within their permissions and within what they usually do. To not allow maybe the security tools to alert the security teams of what they're doing, or in the case of the non-malicious attempts that happen, or non-malicious employees or individuals in the organization, security teams, they're given a very, very difficult task, which is if you're ever doing an exercise where you have a red team and a blue team, the blue team has to get it right 100% of the time. The red team just has to get it right once before they can cause a change in the network. Okay, so it's difficult to have the ability to overlook every keystroke, every mouse click. But what you can do is you can start using other technologies like machine learning to leverage that, to look at things agnostically, try to build an understanding of what this device does, what it usually does from day to day, what this user does from day to day, have a complete and understanding of that and a complete picture of that. So that's what we would recommend. And with those efforts, anytime that something deviates from the norm of that device, that user, let's say, or that network segment, you can have AI work on your behalf. So in this case, we have the ability that if there is some sort of malware, let's say, for example, that's on the network, that perhaps knows what tools are there, what specific patterns that those tools are looking for, or security teams are looking for, it would try to change its signature or its profile. With machine learning, especially if you're looking at it at a very open and agnostic level, you would be able to find early indications of possible change that may be a contributor to this. There's a very big industry in the dark web, ransomware. So this, ransomware as a service. There are ransomware kits that people can purchase because they've realized that, in the past it used to be that only the ransomware was only for big organizations. But actually what we're seeing is that it could be across all kinds of organizations, all kinds of industries, okay? It's a very profitable industry because you can imagine data is money, and having access to that, or in this case, when you have a victim who loses access to that, they will get quite desperate in wanting to get that information back and recover it. So what we see is that that's one thing that's growing in the region in particular. And also cryptocurrency as well. That's a big thing, whether it's happening by people mining in big networks, like let's say a school network, for example, on their own PCs, or let's say, for example, in through a web browser via cryptojacking on the web browser. Okay, so one suggestion that we have is using machine learning. And then there's two different types of machine learning. So there's supervised machine learning, which you feed data sets to, let's say, for a security team, and they understand, oh, okay, this is the profile of what can go potentially wrong. Let's see if any of these things match back to what is actually happening on the network. Or there's another approach which we would recommend, which is unsupervised machine learning, which is just taking raw network traffic from a network, the raw behavior of what a user does, and then try to understand and correlate that back to a profile of what they do. Using other algorithms as well, you can understand how perhaps these users or devices, how they can be similar. So let's say even if there's one infected host, in that network you'll be able to catch it because just as a deviation from the norm of that network as a whole. Okay. So one of the approaches that we have is modeling one that's very successful in the biological world. So the human immune system, okay? So your body is keeping you day in, day out alive for many, many years and across, of course, the lifespan of humans. And what it does intrinsically is that it knows itself very well. So it's using some of the aspects that we were mentioning about machine learning. So giving an understanding, your body knows how a specific cell should behave, how an organ should function for yourself, and also the system, whether it's a respiratory, a circulatory, or digestive system. Anytime there's something that deviates from that norm, your body will then make a response or create a resolution for it. So we are able to do something similar when it comes to cybersecurity. And that can be done with a number of different attempts, basically, to highlight early on any kind of early indication of cyber threat. Let's say a user logs in at an unusual time. Maybe a process they're running on their endpoint is different from what they usually do. Okay. Anytime that happens, when you have a tool that's using unsupervised machine learning, an AI component to block or stop those unusual events, we can do it from here. A lot of networks, are no longer only on-prem. We have a lot of things that are on cloud. Cloud is basically someone else's computer or someone else's server, which means when it comes to security, it's a shared service. You see there's been in the market a lot of compromise with those contractors, those vendors, AWS. So having network visibility, understanding of what's going on there, is also very, very important when it comes to that. Internet of Things, so as offices, houses, just our communities becomes more and more connected, interconnected, smarter. It's also more assets to keep in mind and having to monitor, and more assets that can be potentially compromised. So again, understanding what those devices usually do, having an understanding of what's normal for them, can be very beneficial if there's an early indication, let's say, of a potential exploit being made, vulnerability that may have arisen from that device. So we see, in a lot of different offices, perhaps that, they've done, security team's done a very good job at protecting all the endpoints, whether they're laptops or workstations, but then there's a IoT device that's compromised, like a CCTV camera, for example, and they had no idea because they didn't know what services were running there. But using machine learning and having an AI component to stop these kind of attacks, very, very beneficial for those organizations. Next slide. Okay, so some of the things at Darktrace we've found that usually go unnoticed, they can vary from things on endpoint, so malwares, ransomware, like I mentioned before. Kind of data exfiltration or data modification done by people on the inside. Like I mentioned, IoT, possible compromises from IoT devices. So for example, in the region and in a lot of hospitals we've seen, for example, or healthcare devices are compromised. So there are many, many attempts done externally. There may be one that's successful. And then you'll have a big leak, like what happened where I live in Singapore, where they're leaking, customer data, the patients that are, what they're having, what kind of ailments they're having, things like that, which is quite embarrassing. But also is quite profitable because if it's a a person of high importance or a figure, that medical record in the dark web can be quite expensive once they have that information. So we're able to find things like that, things across supply chain. So a lot of attack patterns that we're seeing now is some hackers are actually hacking organizations that are providing security services. So they hack them, and then they affect the whole supply chain when all the assets that are, let's say, doing some sort of update based on the contract, basically they push that vulnerability across. So we've been able to catch any kind of attempts from there. We're able also to give a perspective or an understanding of what can be done to improve IT security posture. So for example, let's say if any outdated protocols are running, any services that are potentially desirable, we can highlight to the security teams that these most likely should get offline. Okay, I'm going to show some case studies, some pretty interesting ones that we've seen in region. But of course we have more, so if you wanted to come and visit myself or the Connex team, you can. Some of the use cases here that I wanted to share. Here, this was a very interesting one that happened in financial services industry, where sorry, I'm having trouble with this slide. Anyway, I'll just move on to this one. This was with a transportation customer. So they had a payment kiosk that was internet facing. Okay, so these things usually don't have an endpoint security that or anyone that's monitoring it, but because of the machine learning capability that we were able to give them, they were able to see that this one particular device was being communicated at an unusual time by a C2 server, and essentially it was being used to siphon information out. And it was a foothold into the organization because from this device, they can go in and get customer records. They can potentially get things that are of worth for the people on the other end, the hackers. So one of the things that we found is, again, it's finding something that's different. In this case, it was that it was connecting to this particular domain that no one else in the network was connecting to. So a very agnostic view. When they did research, the security team did research, they realized that this was the potential C2 server. In the financial services company, we also saw a particular IoT, in this case it was a security camera that had been compromised. So essentially some hackers have very, very dedicated attacks. So let's say they wanted to target a specific individual, maybe a C-level exec, they probably can. And they'll try to communicate with anything in the network to try to see how they can potentially transverse from here to the person's laptop to get and gather information. So we saw this one case where this one camera was compromised. It was sending packets outbound to a particular group that was basically watching, end-to-end what was going on the network, as well as using it as a way of siphoning information out from that endpoint. Another one, again, in the financial services institution that was quite interesting is, again, highly targeted attack on a particular individual. The idea is if they get a foothold or they know a potential vulnerability or let's say sort of credential usage, that maybe that executive uses it across other logins or other devices. So we had a case here where there was a very bespoke attack. Again, the way it was caught is because of the unusualness of this connection. In particular, this one device was connecting to a domain that never bothered to before, but all of a sudden it started to, and it was doing it in a very repetitive manner. So that's sort of the power that the machine learning can do for you on your behalf. This is one that happened in a software company. Essentially, the known vulnerability, and this attacker went across a lot of organizations to go ahead and exploit it. In particular, it was done in a very, very sophisticated manner because it was really going undetected by other security means. So in this case, what happened was because of the unusualness of this particular behavior, we were able to see that that employee information was being stolen from this particular bug, and in particular, what assets were compromised. And what scripts were being deployed. We were all able to see that end-to-end with this network visibility that the machine learning is able to give you. We have a lot of times attacks that come in through email, okay? So these things are quite difficult to control because, again, perhaps the email looks like it comes from a trusted source, and in particular, the person who clicks on the email, maybe out of curiosity, they may end up delivering a payload to compromise the network. So we had one such one. Basically, there was it was delivered to this manufacturing customer of ours, And it was part of a bigger network. So this was happening across other organizations as well. The great thing is, because we were also observing, or rather the machine learning was observing the communication patterns of this particular user, they were able to see that, look, this person doesn't talk to people or receive emails from people that are based out of Russia. And that was one that was highlighted. So the moment that the email came in, it was quickly highlighted to the security team as a potential threat. So they were able to thwart the efforts of these potential hackers. Ransomware, like I mentioned before, there are many different variants, but with the machine learning capability, we're able to see if there's any early suggestion or behaviors that are suggesting a particular ransomware attack. Not particular to a specific strain. So in this one case, we did find an early variant of Grand Crab before it became quite well known. And with our machine learning capability and the AI component attached to it, what happened was the moment that the encryption starts happening and the people are at risk of losing files, then you had those unusual events that were happening stopped on the network. So that further than 5,000 records were not going to be lost. And this was done in a matter of seconds, basically in around 33 seconds, which is faster than what most security teams can do. Because usually when they're under attack like this with a ransomware, they first have to know that it's going on, what device is compromised, and where it's moving laterally. But here, with the visibility of the machine learning, you're able to see that very easily, and also have the AI act on your behalf. Okay, so this all comes from a group of individuals that met at the University of Cambridge in the UK. There are two groups of individuals, so members of the government intelligence agencies, which are MI5 and GCHQ, and also individuals in the machine learning and mathematics community. They wanted to leverage off of their expertise on what they did on the field in terms of operations, and understand why that, with all the resources we have in terms of capability of people, the technologies and the processes that people are deploying in the organization, why there's still these cyber attacks that happen. So that's when they came together in 2013 and started this concept of dark trace in the immune system. Okay, so since then, we've been growing in regions. So for 2015 is when Asia opened their first office in Singapore. I joined around 2016, and we've been able to grow tremendously in the region, servicing a number of different industries, from the universities to most of some of the central banks or the major banks in ASEAN region in South Asia, as well as media companies and small to medium-sized enterprises. These deployments, have been recognized by a number of different agencies. So one in particular I wanted to highlight was Fast Company. So Fast Company is an American publication that talks about rapidly growing companies. And last year they named us one of the innovative companies around the AI and digital space. So it's interesting to see that on that list as well was Spotify, Instagram, and Netflix, which is interesting how everyone's using a component of AI, but again, they're used for different purposes, right? For education, for dissemination of information, but in this case, we were able to do it for cybersecurity. So I want to, again, thank you for your time and attention. If you guys have any further questions, myself and the Connex team are here if you want to learn more, case studies, and potentially how we can possibly help give advice on how to secure your networks. Thank you very much.
For our next session, privacy, the impact it has on governance, risk, and compliance. Please welcome Mr. Mohan Chaturanga. Mr. Mohan Chaturanga is primarily a cybersecurity specialist, and a privacy consultant. He is now the Deputy General Manager for Governance and Cybersecurity at MAS, previously attached to two of the most prestigious audit firms in the world. Mohan is known to be a go-getter, an all-rounder. Mohan holds a BSc in Computer System Networks and Communication, is CISM and CISA certified, and AWS business professional, the list goes on. a certified lead implementation professional for personal information management systems, including GDPR, and last but not least, ISO 27001 certified lead auditor. Mohan, over to you.
Hello. So I'll start with a story actually. So previously I've been a consultant. So I've been consulting certain organizations. So one day I walked in to one of those premises, and when I walked in, so they asked me to take a pass. You have to take a pass to go in, right? So they asked me for an identification. I gave my company ID, and they said no, they can't take my company ID. And then they said, okay, take my national ID card number, right? Okay, then I gave my national ID card to them, and they gave me a pass, right? And then I was away. So I went in. After some time, what happened actually is I got an SMS saying, welcome to blah, 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 right? I was like, okay. Did I give my mobile number to anyone? Did I ask someone to share that with them? No, I only gave my ID, right? So, but I got a message saying welcome to this, which is nice. It's a good gesture. I won't mind it, welcoming someone. But you feel something insecure there, isn't it? When you accidentally get an SMS. One instance, how would you feel? What is the missing piece in this? Same way, every day, I know you all go shopping, you go for retailers, and when you go there, I see people walking into the counter to check out, right, to check out. So when they go and check out, sometimes for your card data or your privilege card data, they ask your mobile number, isn't it, right? If I ask you right now, would you like to stand up here and tell your mobile number? Would you do it? You won't, right? So the thing is, but you voluntarily or involuntarily ought to avoid certain, the processes, you would just do it there, isn't it? Right? Instead of just pulling your wallet and giving the actual card, you would just say the mobile number. This is something we have seen. Then, apart from that, right now, so I'm the first person who is going to do a lecture and ask people to take their phones. So you can take out your phone and type in Google search, type in privacy checkup. You can just do it right now. If you're on Android, I insist you on doing that. So just go ahead. So type it, privacy checkup in Google, and you will find the link. So since you are searching in Google, they will always give you the first Google link, not any other link. So you will see that. Click on it. It will take you up to Google Checkup, Privacy Checkup, which will say what is there on your web browser history, what they do. Next, you will see your location history, right? Then you can go to something called manage your settings or something like that, right? Depending on the version that you have or the app that you have. You will see. And then you go there and ask from them last year, September 18th, where you were. If you have your locations enabled, Google will correctly tell you where you were without a problem. If you are using an iPhone, there is a chance that data will not be there because iPhone only allows in Google Map that only when you use the maps as a service. Otherwise, it won't give you that. My point being, if you have been using Apple Maps, you might have. So in Android, Google Maps records everything, whereas in Apple, Google Maps is not recording, whereas Apple Maps is recording, right? So you could know whatever you are, where you are, so what you have done. So browser history, the passwords you have, everything is there, right? So you can now go home and check what is the privacy setting that you like, and how you would like to, I see smiling faces, so not a surprise. So you might be embarrassed to see that someone knew where you were at that point of time, so yes. Next, this is called dynamic eye tracking calibration. There's something called, once again in Google patent, there's something called Google patent. When you go there, you can see all the patents in the world. So this is called the dynamic eye tracking calibration. Let me simplify that for you. That means whenever you are browsing in the web, if your webcam is open, it will track your movement of the eye, and it will tell you what you are interested in. So far, I know all your dark souls, you didn't click on that, but you like things, isn't it? Right? We all do that. We see things, but we don't like it. We don't want the world to know that we like it, isn't it? Right? We all have that. We all have that in us. But now the problem is, this patent is licensed for Facebook Technologies LLC, right? So now, even though you don't like or share that, if you just stare at it, you know, the feed is here, you see that ad there, you look like this, Facebook still knows that you liked it. So that's where this is. So all this gives you a concern. What is this concern? So where I'm coming from, so in the apparel industry, 30 years back, it was very simple. So we did bulk processing for some of the world's leading brands. So what we do is they have demand. So we send them the supplies, lingerie, the women underwear and all that, the products that we do. And lately, the problem has been this product was purchased by Jane or Irene in US or Canada. They used to purchase it. We didn't know. We were doing the product for the brand. Apparently, now we know. Now we know where Jane lives. Now we know where Jane's travel pattern is. Now we know what size, what preference, what color preference, fabric preference, where she lives, everything we know. Because we are doing the business we call the D2C, the model of direct to consumer. So the consumer can order and customize and buy products. So the apparel industry itself has changed. So now we know these people and they know us. So the entire business spectrum of things has changed because everything is personalized. So this leads to a concern. What is that concern? So that concern itself is called the privacy. So that is why we have all this privacy, because all those situations makes us nervous. So this is where it all leads to. So if you look at it, it's an express and expose yourself selectively. So privacy is not a concept of data. Privacy is not a concept of technology. It is a fundamental right that we are looking into. And it is a fundamental need of a person. So in privacy, we are addressing, so before we come to data privacy, we address 3 things in privacy. It is something called secrecy, right? You store your information somewhere, Facebook, let's say. I know all of you have some things tagged as only me. There are something tagged as friends only. There are something tagged as public. So you accept that you have a life which is public, which you share with close people, and which is only to you. Don't we all agree on that? Everyone here does that, right? So secrecy means that, so you don't want certain things to be known by others, only for selected people. In online terms, the data terms, we call this confidentiality, access management, encryption, all this leads there. One of the fundamental cores of privacy. Then, next you want the anonymity, right? You want anonymity. So anonymity and the secrecy, the fundamental difference is that I wouldn't mind Google knowing and using to train their models how I went ahead, how I drove in the traffic, as long as it cannot individually be segregated and identified saying it was me. I wouldn't mind if that resource, that data need to be used for research purposes or anything of that sort. I wouldn't mind as long as it doesn't say it is Mohan. We all don't mind, right? So in here, you can synonymize or mask the data for particular fields and use the rest of it. So in online terms. But this is one of the core principles of privacy. Then you have what we call solitude. isn't it? We all need that. We say that, okay, I need a break. I need to be alone. These are fundamental human needs. I need to be alone. So here, solitude means that you will not be left alone. So this is where we have the consent management and purpose limitations. I will explain these things, core concepts. So I don't want my bank to SMS me every day in the morning saying, sir, you are eligible for a loan. Okay, fine, I don't want it, I told you once. I don't want it. How many times you get that email? How many times you get alerted for that? The best part, before I got my 4G SIM, every time I go near my telecom services provider, I get an SMS saying, okay, why don't you upgrade your SIM to 4G? Dude, I know. Right? So solitude, I want to be left alone. So that is one of the core principles in privacy. So what we're trying to embed in a digital world, it is not something out from tech world. It is a fundamental need, a fundamental belief which has been there for many years for humans in this civilization. So all the topics, I think Udita correctly mentioned how to establish an organization on GDPR and all that. So this GDPR and privacy journey, UK has been traveling throughout this for 30 years. That's 30 years matured system we are talking about of privacy, not only data security. So in order to implement this, one core concept you need to understand, we drive into data privacy, but the core concept resides in other areas as well. Why we lack certain things is, as a culture, as a country, we are not prone to certain things of privacy. If you go to Switzerland, or if you go drop in at Frankfurt, you would see a distance between a line. When you go there in a line, you would see a distance, right? Try going into India and sitting in a line. Right? Even though there are 3 people in it, you'll be like, it's extremely uncomfortable. So that affects my bodily privacy, right? That's part of it. Then you have something called territorial privacy. I don't want to be disturbed at my home. You bring certain people into your home, but you don't take the same people into your bedroom, isn't it? Right? That's privacy. That's my territorial privacy. I have a space. And then you have communication privacy. Not only data communication. If I want to have a conversation with you, I will sit with you and have a conversation. I don't want other people to disturb me. We only have to have that conversation private. And then comes to our core principle, the data privacy, right? So these areas are there in privacy. So what we are focusing here today and what we are talking so much is on this component. But we have a total background coming out from very basic fundamental needs in order to come here. Then, this, I think, Tarakum correctly touched on this. In data privacy, why it has become so important is that the total business landscape, the total way that we have been working for so long, tech industry and our lives around it has changed over the past 20 years drastically, right? So this is a diagram showing you the market capitalization in the world of the world's largest companies. Now we have to have a closer look. So before this, there were oil giants, so BP, Shell, everyone was there. And this is when Microsoft entered into business, getting software in. If you see General Electric, Cisco, Walmart, so this is an age where hardware platforms are being established, telecommunication is being established, 1999, 2000s, right? Then what happened is, now all that infrastructure being in place, now we are building a layer, a wealth system on top of that, right? So that is why we have all these companies here, right? In the good old days, we have people give a service which is tangible most of the time, and companies make money, right? So people here, if you see, organizations like Facebook, Alphabet, which is Google, yes, they do provide the service, but I'd rather say that's a platform. But still, you manage to end up being the 4th largest company in the world without producing any content. We produce content for them, right? It's your content. Your content, you have a contribution in this, right? So how this entire ecosystem has worked over the years is that we are moving into this total data age, right? This is why data privacy is so important for you. And on the other hand, the organizations that we currently see, the latest trends, this, if you see, Airbnb, Alibaba, Facebook, Uber, so Uber doesn't own taxis, Facebook doesn't own content, right? Alibaba is a platform for selling, as Amazon. Airbnb doesn't own properties. So what do they do is actually provide a platform to meet the supply and demand, isn't it? And then they built on that particular data so that both these parties will meet more efficiently in the future. I would know more about the buyer, right? And the suppliers would have more visibility about the buyer as well, so they can promote themselves better, right? This is the whole data industry is about, right? Creating platforms. Now, the idea is, in between meeting the correct supplier to the correct buyer, what they use is our data, right? So all these businesses, without owning a single asset, you might see the world billionaires based out of it. So all this data came out from you. So now this is why the regulating of an entire industry of data is being required, because people want their data to be governed correctly and they want the value of it for themselves as well. So one good question is that, will you trade your data for $1,000? Will you do that? So I will discuss that in the later part, how that can affect you. But this is the total background where privacy has come into the picture after 20 years of revolution in the tech industry. Now, when we come to the core, so we know the principles. How do you incorporate all this into a framework when you are implementing? So recently, I've been working with primarily in the leisure sector, because in the leisure sector, they are highly affected by GDPR. A lot of European people coming into Sri Lanka. And so what will happen is they will come to Sri Lanka and we have to abide by all those rules which is there, and EU citizens are aware that there is such a platform, a framework. So in implementing this, the total framework, there may be, let's say GDPR is going to be there. In the evening, we'll probably be discussing about the Data Protection Bill in Sri Lanka. There is one for Singapore. California Data Protection Act is there for US, right? So all this is there. But how can you come up with a framework where the compliance and governance is matched for establishing privacy in an organization? This could be an organization as well as this could be your individual project, anything. But the core pillars, what they are. So few things. So this is all it is built on. That's it. How you do it is irrelevant. But if you do have this 6 pillars in place in an organization, in a system, in a platform, that means you're half there. Your entire journey is finished. So you're done. So you have, if you can provide all these concepts within your platform or within your organization, you're almost there. I will explain all this. So then you build 2 pillars, or rather mechanisms for this to run. So you have the foundation, then you have 2 base pillars to cover this up. Then you would get into the design aspect of it, how it's been designed, and then you manage the actual data subject, or we call the actual individual. So this is how this entire thing is arranged. So irrespective of the act or the compliance framework, whatever it is, if you have this core pillar set up, you are probably in compliance with most of the data standards in the world, right? So I'll quickly explain you what these are. So data processing principles, I said what is the core here. So if you understand the core of privacy, then you can design systems which are in compliant with privacy. So if you look at this, when you think of the core principles, what will happen is security and privacy. I think probably you have discussed this before. So security and privacy, you have to segregate. So as I mentioned, privacy is a more large scope kind of a human connected thing. So security is a component of it. So when you look at this, you need to make sure that there's a purpose limitation. I give you my ID card, not for you to send me a SMS, but for you to give me access to the premises. Purpose limitation. You have to limit your purpose on that. So going forward, every time you build a system, you need to understand why the user is giving you information, right? So stick to that. You can't decide a form when you design a system. Let's say, enter your vehicle data, right? Vehicle number, engine number, chassis number, blah, 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 and you have blood type also. Doesn't make sense. Stick to your purpose. So there's a purpose limitation. Data minimization. Only ask for the data that is relevant for that purpose. So you should not be using any other data. So right now I see with banks, when you go for to fill out a mandate, right, when you create an account, the information that you provide, I have no idea why that information is there, right? You ask for everything, where you live, the previous workplaces, everything. I want to create an account, I want to put my money in your bank, and what are you asking from me, right? So is that everything necessary? Only take what is necessary. Lawfulness is processing. So any organization who's doing this, there should be a lawful basis. So there should be a contractual obligation, there can be a customer, but you need to have a lawful basis in processing. Example, I can't, okay, if I go and ask from Sritira, all the attendees here, right, and take the email addresses of all of you, and then maybe sending some promotional material, doesn't work that. I don't have a lawful processing, right? I don't have to take consent of you. So what is my lawful processing, lawful base for processing? And this two concepts, most of the people ask me, one, integrity and accuracy, isn't that the same? Integrity and accuracy, isn't that the same? Integrity means, okay, let's say I live in Piliyandala, right? Somewhere down the line, I give you my information, I live in Piliyandala. So in your systems, if you are an organization, it says Mon Piliyandala, right? Someone within your organization, without authorized access, comes and changes that to Moratuwa. That is a violation of integrity of your data, right? I myself change my location from Piliyandala to Moratuwa, right? Now your data is no longer accurate. That is accuracy. In order to maintain integrity in your systems, you need to make sure that correct authorization and a procedure is there for you. But in order to be accurate, every year, at least you need to make a call and ask me, where am I, right? So that's the difference. Accuracy is actual source of it, the validity of that data, whereas the integrity is how you maintain that data. And of course, the confidentiality part, the secrecy I told you about. Only people who are eligible to see it shall see it, right? And then the storage limitation, right? You ended up going to a hotel like 10 years back, right, in somewhere, and after 10 years, he's asking you, sir, are you coming next week? Where exactly? Where next week? Who are you, right? Haven't this happened to you? I always get these kind of calls, because once they run out of business only, they remember you like after 10 years or 5 years, they'll be calling me and say, aren't you coming back here? What a good place. There should be a limitation on storage. I went to a place, or I got your service. There should be a validity of time. After that time, it expires. My interest as well as your interest expires. So make sure that there is a storage limitation. So these core concepts, if you can establish in an organization or a platform that you provide, so I keep telling you the platform is that's the trend going forward. So people tend to build platforms. So, but still you need to be abiding by all this. You will understand why it is in the later sessions as well. Going forward in Sri Lanka also, these things will be enforced. Next, okay, there are certain rights, right, that need to be there for users. So simply, so this is a cross section. So based on the standard, it will change. The California Act is different, in Australia is different, in GDPR is different. But basically, it will cover this area. So our users will have access to their information. I can call and ask, what is the information that you're holding of me, right? So that's a right. So I should have the right. Then rectification, right? You keep sending me an SMS saying, hi Kasun, we got this offer. I'm not Kasun. My name is different. So you go and ask the organization, rectify my name. That is not my name. Yes, you understand you have my mobile number. At least send me a correct SMS, right? So you have that right. Restriction, stop it. I don't want it anymore. I don't want your services anymore. Stop it. That's a right. And then objection. So yes, I don't want to completely stop it, but I have objection on this service. You might pause it. After some time, you might start it. And maybe I don't want this service, but I want the rest of it. Objection. Access and erasure. I should be able to see what you have on me. So if you go to Facebook or Google, it will clearly tell you, go to privacy settings in Facebook, or maybe there's something called privacy test is there in Facebook as well now. So you can go and see what is the data that Facebook has on you. All the things, everything is there in a single file, and you can download that as well. That's the best part. So you can see what is the data that they have. Portability, so this is there for some of the countries it is not there. So this is a concept like I'm changing from one insurance service provider to another insurance service provider. Then I can ask my old insurance provider to say, give all that information to my new service provider. I not probably work in Sri Lanka, but so in a certain context it will work. So because of that, so this thing is there. Then we have the revision for automation. All right, very important, very important. I'll give you an example of this. In Cambridge Analytica, what happened in US is simple. They gave you a question here. How many times have you taken quizzes? Personality quiz and all that quizzes you have done, at least seen in Facebook, right? So when you take this quiz, it will identify the behavior and the thinking pattern of this particular individual, right? And this quiz will only be directed to people who are in the middle, right? No Republican, no strong Republicans, no strong Democrats, right? People who are in the middle. It will be targeted for those people. Then that profile will be analyzed. After that, the particular campaign will be drawn to them, ads will be drawn to them saying, this is what you need to see. Example, what Cambridge Analytica is, the campaign is called a Crooked Hillary, right? They work for Trump. They never promoted Trump for that individuals. They only said a campaign called Crooked Hillary. They only talked about Hillary, how bad she is, what she has been doing. They did only that, right? And that's how they do it, because you don't, that's the deciding factor, the vote deciding factor. That's the campaign they have organized. So same thing, if you are so observant and if you are like interested in the field of privacy, you would notice happening in Sri Lanka, which happened in Sri Lanka previously as well, and now also happening in Sri Lanka. So they have even approached at that time Sri Lanka as well, and they have worked, you won't believe that they have worked for elections in 49 countries throughout the world, right? Imagine manipulated 49 nations, right? So the idea is, how that happens is, I was subjected to automated decision making. Some algorithm decided that I need to see this, right? A behavior questionnaire was run on me, and then they decided that my behavior is so this, and I need to look for it. I need to look at this ad. So no longer I'm subject to this. So if you are doing marketing in Facebook, now you realize you no longer can pinpoint to an individual in Europe and send an ad. But if you do that in Sri Lanka, it works. So that's a major difference. So in an organization, the best thing is, if a customer calls and asks, your employees need to be able to tell them that this right is there. So in a few years' time, what will happen is, even if we enforce this in Sri Lanka, you as a customer call your service provider and ask, I need to see my data. What do you mean? Why do I show you your data? I need to erase this. Why do I erase this? So if the employees of the organization doesn't know about this, that the customer has these rights, so it's going to be a mess. So you will see the importance of this with the data protection bill that is coming in. And then the organization of, so bird's eye view, I think probably, once again, Udita have explained on this. So organizations should be able to see the personal data that they hold, the inventory of it. Very important. Otherwise, you can't control it. Then, a simple thing, a data protection impact assessment and a person to look after it. You need someone to drive this at an organization. It's a must. Anyway, you need to have someone looking into this. So that is how you implement it. And then a simple way of doing things, see how your data flows in an organization, how that come in, forms, marketing, mandates, any other KYC, know your customer data, or where that's coming. Make an inventory of it, whether you hold personal data or not. Example, so one of my customers back then, he was asking me, he was in actually a corporate sales business. So he only works with corporate, he doesn't do B2C. So he doesn't sell to consumers directly, he's into B2B. So he was asking me, Mohan, we need to do GDPR. I was like, why do you need to GDPR? So we are doing a lot of business and all that. So I said, do you hold personal data of your customers? No, we don't have personal data, but we do a lot of business with the people there. So doesn't necessarily required. So whatever these frameworks, if you don't hold the personal data, you don't have a risk. So no need to do it. Inventorize it. Do a risk assessment and see how this works. Kind of understand what's your risk domain. Mitigate it and understand the exposure of the organization. So this is a simple way of doing things. After that, you have to look at your consent management part. So be very specific about what you do at the consent level. You have the consent to process. Now you can once again go back and read the consent of what you have given to Google. If you go to Google Maps, actually you have given consent to track your wherever you are. So you will see that you have given consent. But later now, it has come to a level, say if you have seen the investigation at Singapore, what happened. So the consent that we take, the policies, terms of use need to be at a very readable format and easy to understand even by a minor. That means even if a child reads it, you need to be able to understand. Because of that, if you go to community standards in Facebook, that is where you get all this, what should be doing, what should not be doing. It is written in a way, even though it's a policy, you are supposed to do it like that. If you don't do this, this will happen. That is why the language has been so different over the years. Now previously it was around 16 pages if you look at Apple terms of use also. Now it's very simple. It simply says what you do and what they use the data for. So this is pretty efficient. So you can go and see how they have done it. And right now, when you take the consent, you need to manage it. If you're updating it, make sure that something has gone wrong. Okay, I need to go back and take the consent once again for this. If not, so we won't be doing that. So giving your consent is extremely important. So going forward, just see whether what you have consented for in the past. The taxi services that you use, right? The taxi services that you use have very extensive permission, although you don't know within your phone, right? Especially if you look at Uber. Uber connects Uber Drive with Uber Eats, right? How you drive and how you eat is a wonderful data combination to have. The travel pattern and the eating pattern, right? So it can pinpoint you and tell you, okay, if you are planning your day, why don't you take lunch there? Why don't you take dinner there? So it will keep suggesting you that based on your travel pattern, you can eat there, right? If you're at a meeting, why don't you order now? So that is where they are at. So make sure how you set your permissions. I will come to a certain conflict at the last part. So, but at the moment, make it essential, give it really retractable, active, but you can't have silent consents. So previously, back those days, we had that tick marked. You just have to click, I agree. No longer, that's not the case. So you have to take it, read it, very simple, and mark it. Explicit consent. Then, the privacy by design part is actually to say, when you are designing a system, make sure that all these are embedded. Example, transparency with users. Tell them what you are doing, pretty simple. And whenever you design a system, take a user-centric approach, where you will be able to take profiles out and see how user profiles are managed, what they have access to, what they see, and all that. And then the breach, I'll come to the breach part actually. So value privacy as a default setting. So whenever someone logs into your system, it's not all on, it's all off, right? After that, they can turn anything on. That should be the privacy design. So a lot of you might be getting into software industry and pulling things out and see, so by design in the future, in the future, by design, the systems need to be able to facilitate that by default privacy feature. So it's not all in, you don't have all enabled, you have to go and explicitly enable that. So that's going to be the future. And one other key area is that, okay, certain litigations happened. I'll give an example on that. British Airways got the heaviest fine for GDPR, and Marriott Chain is looking at somewhere around $1 billion. And there are other entities. Facebook got fined for 900. So after all these fines, Cambridge Analytica was so big, right? And Facebook got fined for 500,000 only. How did that happen? Because by that time, what you see is, although you see a quiz coming up from Cambridge Analytica, Facebook says that this is a third-party app which has been using this, blah, 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 this will be transferred to a third-party app. You have to allow it. You have to allow it. Once you click it, the personality test never pops up directly, right? You have noticed it. You go to a different screen, then you say OK, and then that's pop up. So these are the controls which are there in the system. So you have to make sure that the system design itself, so rather than the easiness or the revenue that you generate, a privacy balance of it is there, right? So these are key design concerns. So they proved in the code that they have privacy design in place. They have concerned privacy in designing systems. So that is one of the key areas that they get off with. And the last part, the reporting breaches. So whenever we are designing a thing, let them know that if something goes wrong, if your systems are breached, let the users or your customers know. Number one rule, right? Talk to them, talk to statutory authorities, let them know that this has happened. It's extremely important. So the consumers know the impact that they are having. So be transparent is extremely important. So this is the last place I want to be discussing with you. This piece, actually the same diagram I think Parakum also had, accidentally, not by version. So 3 million items shared within 60 seconds in Facebook, and you have Tinder doing more than 18,000 swipes. You have tweets this much, YouTube this much of videos being watched. Now, let me ask you a question. Will you trade off privacy for convenience? That is what we call the privacy paradox. This is the actual question that we need to be asking going in future. So will you have a YouTube which will always give you fresh content rather than what has been personalized for you? You like, as Parakum correction me, you like Land Rovers? You like watching Land Rovers? So YouTube suggests you videos of Land Rovers. Do you want that to suggest Toyotas? Right? So it's a convenience, but you can't have privacy 100% and the convenience at 100%. You need to find the balance. Example, Facebook, all this content that is coming to you, the closer circle, the Facebook closer circle you will get. Closer circle updates you will get sooner, right? You want that convenience to be there or not. So this is called the privacy paradox. So based on that, always remember, there's something called route to be forgotten, but there's always you have that wish to be remembered, isn't it? Even in life, you have that. You have the right to be forgotten, but you have that wish to be remembered, right? You want the convenience, but there's a balance between convenience and privacy. So that is where you need to expect, and organizations, we expect the trust that we keep on them to be delivered back to us. So going forward, what will happen is, it's all going to be a trust-based business, and from that point, if we trust someone, if we trust their privacy on it, then we will be working with them. So these are the core concepts I want to find. I think we can move to the other session. So if there's any other question, I would be happy to answer. So I'll be here with the panel as well. Any questions, just pop up there. And thank you very much.
Up next, we have our first panel discussion on resilience through privacy in cyberspace. I'd like to invite Mr. Kumar Mantri, our moderator for the day. He's the immediate past president of ISACA Sri Lanka chapter, who is attached to Deloitte as the manager for risk advisory. And our panelists would be our previous speakers, Mr. Mohan Chaturanga and Mr. Udita Vijayasundara.
So, as we see, the privacy is in our country's context is something new. It was always been information security. Now we see that privacy is gaining momentum. I would like to ask Udita, why is GDPR compliance requirement a big deal?
Yeah, as I explained in my session as well, so the privacy is very, new for us as well as for the world, since we are collecting more information from us, especially like Mohan explained as well, like the personal data. So most of the time people doesn't know about it and who use that, how they use it, and so then the Regulation Act, I think the Privacy Act, we had in 1995, if I'm not mistaken, in Europe. It was not really, like a matching with the digital age, right? So they thought of, okay, so how really they can support for these, people who's really, hold these data. So they really change it, to enforce the companies who hold this data to protect it. It actually the benefit of, like the people who is hold this data, because they really use it and people doesn't know how actually they use it. Right, so that is why it is very, very important. That is why they have, increased the fine as well for the companies to be compliant. So that is why it is a big deal. As a company, we really need to be able to, disclose, how our data has been processed and, like how, for what purpose actually it had been used. So that is why, so as a company, so we are in a little bit, like a cricket situation. Okay, how we can do that? At once, within 1 year actually, they have asked us to, comply. Can we do that? Do we have a solutions? So that is the big deal, so then how we can really approach it.
Mohan, as you correctly said, data is important. Is there a difference between personal identifiable information and I've heard this new another term, sensitive personal identifiable information? Is there something that is different in those two?
Yes, so personally identifiable information primarily falls into that whatever directly connected to you. So for you to identify me, my name would be a direct identifier, my phone number, where I live, how I travel, all that is directly related. But there could be something sensitive, more sensitive than that. So that is something who I am, my DNA, my blood type, all my health preferences, my allergies. So they are sensitive. So what will happen is you can't treat the same way how you treat personally identifiable information, how you treat my mobile number, and how you treat my blood type or my DNA information, all that, that's totally different. So this has a huge impact when it comes to leisure sector in Sri Lanka. So this has a vast impact because whenever someone coming from Europe or somewhere else, they send all these details, their food preferences, allergies, for you to do bookings. So that is why leisure sector is pretty much affected on this. So sensitive information, you need to have several controls. You can't have automated decision making on it. You can't be storing them in the same way that you store others. You don't have a different access matrix in it, encryption. A lot of tools need to be implemented to safeguard that. But once again, it comes from the basic privacy principles that, so sensitivity of it. So if you are storing my personal information, straightforward. But who I am, so you can take my information away, but can I let you take my identity away? So that's a real question. So that is why it's identified as sensitive.
Yeah, to add into that, actually, it's more into the, the biometric data as well, so when we have the finger, machines to, access those and all, it's very strict in, European Union, so we cannot use them actually as a, access methodology. So that's why, because as Mohan said, so then it is more into, there are more secrets, because my health is my secret, right? so people should not really use it. That's why, like you can see in ICO, so there are high, big fine on those, violations, especially sharing those information.
Is there any questions from the audience that asks my esteemed colleagues? As students, when you go out in the industry, privacy will be something that would be a very important factor. So if any questions you have now that you like to ask, you can answer, because they have got the experience to help you with. Just raise your hand. I'm sure we can get a mic across. If you all want, if you have anything. My next question to Ms. Udita. So if I'm in an organization and I have to comply with GDPR, what are the key things I must know or I must do to start off with?
So the first thing actually, like to do what actually, so we have, so have an inventory on it, right? And just, run, across your all the, departments and check with them. Okay, so what data actually we receive, right? And especially from the employees as well as the customers, especially customers, because customers are having bigger deal, and because they can go to the authorities and they can actually declare, okay, so my data is violated by this ABC company, so they can put the case on it. So what we did actually, so we got the consent from them. Okay, so we are receiving, your information, and we are processing it, in our other nations as well, because we are a multinational company. We have, 8 countries in operation. So we told our customers, we started, for more than 400 customers across, our company. We inform them, right? So if you really want to do that, first step is to inform them and, have a little bit, a flexible background to work at, because we cannot do, overnight, a shift. So we agreed with them, and then we started, finding data and how actually we collect them. As Mohan correctly explained, what we collect and what purpose actually this data is used for. And we have to explain them. And we don't have yet the system to prove them. This is how actually it is being processed, right? If they ask, of course, we don't have yet. But it's a mutual understanding, and the GDPR also doesn't have a clue, how actually it can be evolved. And, so it is actually the learning. Like you all, so ask a question, and, so they have, a lot of engagement with the companies, and we will actually learn from the challenges, and we will allow, to be implemented. So that's what actually the first thing we should do.
Mohan, you talked about it is important to have a constant review, as it were, with regard to the information you hold, to ensure integrity, to ensure accuracy. Now, ISACA being premier on audit, information audit, how would we audit and review compliance to privacy?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. So this is an area which is really needs evolvement, and there are frameworks that have been set. But currently the compliance framework itself is that you go and see what are the available standards. I think GDPR being one of the benchmarks, and other data standards as well. So you see the compliance framework is that, so the core principles, whether they have been established in the organization, and would you have enough evidence to support that these core principles are being adhered to, rather than testing all the controls. Because the primary difference is that what you are testing for is not only security. So security testing, yes, we do have all the frameworks to do. Exactly. So 27001, all the security frameworks are there. But how are you going to make sure whether the privacy is there or not? Then it's a matter of processes. But the primary starting point, as correctly mentioned by Udita, is the data set. You need to, as an auditor, as a reviewer, need to understand what is the data set that you are looking at. So then understand the liabilities, the impacts that's going to have, all that. Example, if it's a bank, you're looking at investors, the people who have created accounts on it, people who are on the remittance, on the banking industry, you're looking at all that. If you go to leisure, all the travelers, all the people who are there. If you go to telco, people who come from abroad and take all those SIM cards and everyone. What's that data set? Then you look at what's the exposure you're looking at. How many people, how much of records, and what are the fields. It is extremely important, because the risks would differ as if they have sensitive information risk will differ. So likewise, the framework itself, the auditors will need to build that up, but from the core principles of privacy, not from the core principles of security. Organizations can be extremely secure, but very poor in privacy. And there can be organizations who are still maturing in security, but who are very well designed privacy programs. So this balance the auditor need to understand and benchmark with probably, if we don't have a country law governed by it, so far we don't. Hopefully we will have it by December or somewhere. But if you don't have a country framework on it, better to stick to some kind of a best established framework and do the audit and review on it.
Just another question. I think both of you can answer the final question. Has this GDPR, we're going to talk about the Data Protection Act later on, but has GDPR impacted Sri Lanka in a different way now? Can you see that as an industry as working in?
Yeah, of course, so because it's impacted us as well, because certain customers in European Union, so strictly, advise not to share any information other than European Union. So we have a customers and we cannot support from Sri Lanka. It is really affecting, entire business. So because, so they are so strict and they strictly said, okay, so my data should be landed in Europe, so data center itself should be in Europe, in Azure itself. And we really need to show them, okay, we are not really copying your, a backup, at least, for the other location. And Microsoft also had an issue, because we raised to them as well, because they are replicating, their data everywhere, right? And they don't know actually where their data as well. Even we don't know, because we are service provider for the customer. So we raised them, and Google as well. And yeah, it is having, impact. But, as a, a tree concept of GDPR, we have a subject, and we have a processors, and we have actually the controllers, right? So most of the time, we are actually the processing unit. So we actually process the data, and so we give the output for them. So the controller is having more actually responsibility here, and they have to have a contact with the customers and tell, okay, which a data being sent out from their European Union. So it is of course affecting.
And just to add a few things onto that. So if you look at the impact as a country what we are having, so we have a lot of very large businesses which are relying primarily on European Union. The leisure sector, we have a very large component which is depending on people coming from there. And then we have a lot of outsourced businesses, starting from BP operations, from finance to IT to other operations, which we do. And Sri Lanka has a lot of finance outsource operation also we have to consider. There are a lot of finance professionals who are working from here who is providing services to European entities. So all those invoices, POs, everything has personal information. So they have to now, they became a hot destination because they were so cost effective in this region, right, in the first place. Now you build all these frameworks into place, now we are no longer the most cost effective destination to go to outsource, right? So they are now facing a huge market risk failing into other countries. Because the thing is, Sri Lanka still don't have the Data Protection Act. So when you consider outsourcing now, European entities need to think twice, right? So should they be abiding by our rules? Will they have the baseline in place? So now that is a considering factor. So they might be, reluctant to outsource to a certain extent because the fine is so high. I'll give a simple example. Should I rather take a $500,000 fine and outsource to Sri Lanka, or just a bit more costly in Singapore? Just have something there in Singapore and just go there. So should I take that risk, or should I change the market? So that is a huge impact that we will have if we don't have a baseline in the country.
Is there any questions from the audience? Young minds want to know. You have a question? No? Yes, there's a question right there.
Yeah, I just want to know, so is the GDPR, is it really effective? Because so when the thing with the Facebook happened, so there was an inquiry and all that, but still that they could afford the fine, like it's okay with them, because they are what I'm asking is, should we impose like more stricter laws? Like, is GDPR, like, is it really effective as they say it is?
Okay, so one thing. So whenever a regulation or a framework comes in, we call there everything has a maturity circle. So in the initial part, it's more of a defining and implementation of a framework, whereas it will evolve into a state called enforcement. So where the enforcement is very strict and the fines will be stricter. So the idea is businesses also will need a time to adapt to all this. So that provision was there initially for an year. Then after that, now the cases are being that. So initial cases didn't have much of a fine. Now the fines are getting bigger, right? Now the cases are being investigated very quickly. Things are coming into picture. So with the time, this will evolve. So if you are saying, yes, I do understand you can go for stricter, go for fines, much larger fines. But at the moment also 20 million euros is pretty large. So unless you're Facebook or Amazon or a pretty large player in the first 5-10 areas, first 5-10 companies in the world, if it gets hit by a middle range player, that's a pretty large sum of money. And the other part, the 4% of the annual turnover where British Airways got hit on. So that is a huge hit, considering the current market opportunities as well. So it's not that kind of a great market at the moment. So every market is at a loss at the time. So that is a huge amount for the time being. But just to add something to that, the enforcement part for a framework usually depends. Fines, yes, but fines are considered as a reactive control. The proactive control would be to educate all the consumers, get people online, and make the framework better. So fines, yes, we can include that. So let them be more afraid, so they will adhere to it. But the awareness on consumers will have more impact. So we will see this still 2 years down the line. So I think probably by 5 years down the line, we will have a huge fines and a lot of people getting into it.
Yeah, actually, it is not really about the number or the figure, and it is actually, Mohan correctly said, it's the awareness actually the people should have. That is actually they are enforcing it. That's why the fine actually a little bit like a bigger now, and it's like that Okay, so in Sri Lanka also we have these fines from the traffic. The after drink you should not drive, right? The fines are a little bit high now. So do you mean that, okay, so people really should drink and drive? No, right? So why actually is increase, it is not good. Okay, so you have to control yourself, because it is not really, going to be healthy, condition to drive yourself, right? And even, you can have 100,000 fine, but people will pay it, right? But the real impact will be not there. So it is a little bit awareness. That's what actually we try to do is as well. It is starting from the employee itself. Then it will be involving, to go to the next level, And of course, Facebook have money. They can really, take care about them. But like, small, medium companies, so it is not possible. So they have to really comply with the, the regulations. And the trust, because, just imagine, if it has happened 2-3 times, no one will trust the Facebook.
Yeah, but with the Facebook, actually, still that all that happened, but still, they don't lose that much of market because so people still they don't. It's like they don't care.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I want to just answer this as a risk professional. I mean, most of us here at ISACA will tell you, you cannot eliminate the risk, but you can reduce the risk. And the fine, as Mohan and Udita has said, is 20 million euros or 4% of your global turnover, whichever is higher, right? And if you are breached and you don't notify within 72 hours, you are liable to that fine by a data protecting authority. Now that is from either USA if it's GDPR, UK, Europe, and if it is in USA, the Privacy Shield. But what happens is you reduce the risk. It's just that. Every risk professional will tell you that risk cannot be eliminated. but you can reduce it to a level that is acceptable.
And you can actually, raise a question for, authorities as well. If you really see, your data being used for, unnecessary thing by Facebook or Google. Now you have option. You can go and, ask from, hey, how you actually, use my data and get verified. And that's why, the Facebook as well as Google now allowing you to see most of the information where, the track, where I went and how data being used, So then you have option. You can disable that. And that's why they're asking, so while using that, so I will use these services. It's your choice.
Last question, anybody else? This is a gentleman here.
I would like to know if you can share a bit on if you take the implementation life cycle of this Privacy Act by sharing some of the cases that I think probably Mohan and Udit would have gone through. What would be the stages that organization would have to go through in terms of implementation, and what sort of challenges that needs to get addressed as you progress?
So first thing is the identification of exposure. So first thing you need to understand how much of data are you working with for personally identifiable information. This is the domain that you are trying to protect. So privacy-centric, user-centric approach. Think how much of exposure are you having now in terms of personally identifiable information. Do an assessment throughout the organization and understand what is your inventory. Then there are core principles I explained. So the purpose limitation, accuracy of it, confidentiality of it, data minimization. These principles, how can you apply? So if you look at GDPR also, it is a consumer legislation where it will tell the requirement, not how to implement it actually. And it will always have a interpretation of your own, right? Everyone can interpret that, that's legislation. So that based on that interpretation, you can enable these core principles within the organization. After that, privacy design thing, so everything that you do, privacy is embedded, build a new system, new migration, new thing happening, new business that you enter. So everything designed in a privacy-based system. I mean, we always consider privacy. Breaching reports and all that, take that part out, make the incident management framework within the organization correct, so it is in line with GDPR incident management. Then you have the data protection impact assessments, data protection officers, and do the consent management properly. So these core pillars, GDPR doesn't tell you do this, do this, do this, do that. No, nothing like that. Nothing like ISO 27001 implementation guide, nothing like that. It gives you a concept. It's for up to decide where we are going to meet the compliance at. You can't meet 100 compliance in the first year or first 6 months, never going to work. So where you are going to meet at, what is your interpretation of it, what is your applicable version of it for yourself. Then based on that, start the journey, follow these steps, build core principles, privacy by design, incident management, consent management, impact assessment, data protection officers, and go forward. So that's a way of, maybe Udita can add something.
Yeah, exactly. I think, the DPO is, I think, the very, key role, so you can start with, so because we need to have a certain person who really take care about these incidents and, so there's, like a data. So then he can start and, discussing with, other people in the industry or, the company, so how to start with this, right? So what is the best way to do that? So what we did in our company, we appointed one person and so we name it as a DPO. And initially we did not have much time, for him to involve this. What we told them, okay, so just try to grab the information flow, right? And try to understand, so what information is needed. Trust me, more than 70% information actually not needed. Because what we realize is, while doing that exercise, okay, why really want to keep this? We have unnecessary, force from the other authorities, if we really store them. So let's change a little bit, the process. So process changes are not happen yet, but we are in the investigation mode yet. And what we actually, implemented, okay, so if something happened, especially the data breach, we have a mechanism in place in the company to where to report. So we collect this information and we see, okay, where are the first, actually the point to be addressed. So right now we are actually in the investigation mode. So you can start in the same way. Then you can actually check what is the best framework we can actually implement it, and what are the data really we need to protect, and how really we engage with the people, especially the employees, then they will actually buy our idea. So that is the most important thing. Otherwise we cannot really force. It is like Mohan said, yeah, okay, so we have policies, follow it. No, right? It is a guideline. That is why it is more simplifying now. Okay, so what to do if something happen, right? So then that is actually the method we used, and we are trying, to get, like a more engagement with the global operation as well in US as well as Australia. We have multiple, like a compliant, requirements as well. So it is very big because USA is not really, like supporting GDPR as well. So they have a different, like compliance to be compliant. So it is so difficult. Best thing, know what actually you should really store and how you protect it. That's it.
There's one last question.
Yeah, now let's say time to come after the GDPR is implemented, and then let's say in Sri Lanka too you get another act with regards to privacy. So in that case, as a third party, let's say a vendor, maybe developing softwares for a international client, okay? So they breach one of these, acts, and then I want to know for which act they get bounded to.
Okay, so this is a pretty gray area. Enforcement of a particular act. So if you have an establishment in EU, right, you are doing business in EU, and if you have establishment in EU and your litigation process is against the establishment in EU, then definitely you are bound by the EU laws. But things get grayed bit when you come to do business from Sri Lanka kind of a country to somewhere else. Once again, the story is very straightforward. If we have the data protection bill in place, that's a country's law governs everything. So we are governed under the country law. So under Sri Lanka, we'll be governed. We will have the data protection bill, everything. If we don't have the data protection bill, we are in Sri Lanka and we are doing business and goods and services for EU, that's a gray area, how the enforcement is going to happen. But that is why the data protection bill assessment is all being driven by EU Chamber of Commerce getting involved. That's why they want to push it up. So how it is there, but it is not, I can't say that it's 100% not applicable, because we have certain unilateral agreements, Budapest conventions, certain things that we have agreed to as a nation also related to cybercrime. But the idea is direct enforcement is a bit of a gray area, but it be subjected to litigation process. That's once again an interpretation of, all the arguments which is going to happen with all the lawyers and how that is going to go ahead. But rather than the litigation, what most organizations are worried about is the reputational damage that they are going to take. So litigation is one thing. Let's say I'm not fined, but if my brand says that I don't respect privacy, I don't respect security, so people don't want to do business with me. So going out of business is the risk. So people are not worried about then in Sri Lanka also now all these leisure sector clients that I worked with. So at a very higher group level, chairmen wanted to know whether we'll go into litigation and what's the impact. So I said, we are not aware of it, but the brand impact is very real. So that's enough. But definitely which country's law is depend on the basement of where your company is at. So that is why Facebook, they have the corporate office under community standards in Ireland, Dublin. So all these cases were done with them. So based on the country, they have operations. So all these litigation cases never went to LLC. I mean, the technology is LLC in California. So it was all done for Ireland entity. So once again, it's based on the establishment you are, business registration where you are at. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think the regulations and the authorities need to have engagement, like, so what we do today here, right? So they will actually discuss, because best example, I think in Norway, right? So then they are not yet, have an authority defined for GDPR, because they really had, a discussion with the government and the GDPR authorities, okay, so how they can comply, because it is not really, beyond going with their laws. So then they try to come, to the certain level, okay, so how the agreement should work. So in Sri Lanka also, if someone is actually going to work on this, so they really want to think about how the global operation also should work from Sri Lanka, because it is not to stop someone, but it is, like a ground floor where all can work together.
Thank you.
I think we are done. Any more questions? Thank you. I'd like to thank, I think, over to the
Thank you, Mohan, Kumar, and Udita. I would like to request Mohan and Udita to remain on stage. And I call upon President Mr. Sitirivanyarachi. We have a small token of gratitude. On behalf of ISACA, I would like to express immense gratitude for taking time off your busy schedules and sharing invaluable knowledge with all of us. I'm sure all of us would have benefited, and we look forward to working with you all in the future.